afternoon, early evening, everyone. I cannot believe that this is the last time I'm going to say I'm Margaret Mueller, President and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. I obviously did not know this when we were planning this event, but it's so fitting to me that this is my last event. I'm so passionate about this topic and have so many friends who are going to be on the stage, and I'm thrilled that you're all here. Thank you. Before we begin, I do want to extend a warm welcome to the members of our Board of Directors and our Board of Advisors who are here with us this evening. Please stand as I call your name so we can recognize you. Mary Cook, Market Leader and Senior Managing Partner, Korn Ferry. Jessica Fairchild, Partner, Croak Fairchild Berries and Duarte. Sandeep Nain, President and CEO, Essential Technologies. Kristen Prince, Founder and Managing Partner of the Prince Law Firm. And Julie Scott, President and CEO, CTS Impact. Did I forget anyone? Okay, thank you all for your commitment and your support. Also, some extra special thanks to the Prince Law Firm. They're our featured sponsor of today's event. And to our Signature Series sponsors, they're all listed on the last page of your program. These are all of the companies in Chicago that support the club and make all of our programming possible. If this is your first time at an Exec Club event, thank you for joining us. We'd love to share more about membership. There's a membership table outside. You can talk to any of the staff who have a badge like this, and anyone who has a member badge, I'm sure they would love to talk to you about membership and anything that you might want to know to consider joining. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome this powerhouse group of speakers we have featuring so many influential women entrepreneurs. Obviously, there were many more we'd have liked to feature. We don't have room for everyone, but we're trying to mix it up as best we can. So I'm going to run through everyone who's going to be on stage, and then I'll turn it over and we'll get things going. So kicking things off will be Star Marcello, the Deputy Dean of MBA Programs at Chicago Booth. She has a keynote that I've asked her to do several times, and she graciously keeps telling me, sure, I'll do that presentation again for you, Margaret, on the critical question, why aren't women getting funded? And then after Star, we're going to hear from two amazing panels. The first will examine Chicago's role in supporting women entrepreneurs. It's going to feature Ellie Barmasal, founder and CEO of Paranaut, Shayna Harris, managing partner at Supply Change Capital, Sonia Nagar, co-founder and managing partner of Snack Venture Partners, and Betsy Ziegler, CEO of 1871, who will moderate the discussion. And then our second panel will explore the investor landscape and feature Susan Abrams, managing director, Golden Seeds, Melissa Wyden, co-founder, chief legal officer, and head of impact deposits at First Women's Bank, Desiree Vargas Wrigley, co-founder of the Josephine Collective, and moderating with Amanda Lannert, CEO of Jellyvision. So please join me in welcoming Star Marcello to kick us off.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here, and it's such an honor to be discussing something that is so important to me, and I think very important to a lot of the people who are here tonight, the opportunities and challenges for female founders. So I hope that my talk, my keynote, will provide a bit of context before those amazing panels we just heard about. You have me for about 15 minutes, and then we'll get into the panel discussions. So I, as you know, am from Chicago Booth at the University of Chicago. I've spent over 20 years working with entrepreneurs through my work there. I typically work with founders at the very earliest stages of venture creation, the idea stage, and help provide them with resources and connections they need to make their dreams a reality. So it will not surprise you at all to hear that most of those dreams will never soar, and to say that starting a company from the ground up is hard is a huge understatement. The opportunity we have tonight to find out what are the obstacles, what are the opportunities, how do we fund our female founders, it's really a gift to have this conversation. So you will hear from those panelists, and they are all so connected to this ecosystem and committed to influencing the funding landscape here in Chicago. And so for anyone who is sitting here today thinking about entrepreneurship, so thinking about starting a venture, thinking about investing, fundraising for your venture, the advice that you will hear tonight I think will be very valuable. So the title of this event is Breaking Barriers, and my talk is going to focus on that, some of the barriers that we know exist for female founders. Despite their drive and their vision and their proven results, women continue to receive a disproportionately small amount of venture capital dollars. And I will talk about why there is this disparity and highlight recent data and research just from the past couple of years, and then provide some examples of how this affects female founders here in Chicago. But first, I just want to take 2 minutes to set the stage. I want everyone here to think about the pivotal role that entrepreneurs play in our economy. Entrepreneurs introduce new ideas, drive innovation, and they create jobs. When women are at the helm, we see strong leadership styles that emphasize collaboration, communication, teamwork, and a keen understanding of consumer markets, especially because women influence or control a significant share of consumer spending around the world. Many studies have shown that diverse teams, particularly those that include women, can lead to higher profitability, more innovation, and lower risk for investors, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And every day there are success stories that we see coming out, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention one that I have a personal connection to, which is the example here in Chicago of Caitlin Smith and her company, Simple Mills. I know a lot of people here know Caitlin, and it's such an amazing success from this past year. Caitlin got her start 10 plus years ago at the University of Chicago at Booth in our new Venture Challenge Accelerator program, and built her Better For You food company to become a staple nationwide, and sold her business just recently for almost $800 million, which is amazing. But despite examples like that one, which are so fabulous, and the value propositions I just mentioned, the real reality is that female founders remain underfunded. And this is consistent. I know I spoke with one person here who said, have the numbers gotten any better in the last year? And unfortunately, I do not have data that would show that. So I will just review what is our current situation, which unfortunately has been our current situation for a while now. So according to a number of industry analyses, women-funded startups in the United States receive just 2 to 3, it's around 2.4% of total VC funding. And that figure has remained very stubbornly at that number for many years. In 2022, $5 billion out of $150 billion of VC dollars went to female-founded startups. And another way to think about this is that that means that less than 4 cents out of every dollar went to women-led ventures. Now, not every venture needs venture capital dollars. In fact, most new businesses do not have any VC funding. Less than 10% of startups get funded by VC. That means that the small number that do get funded by VC, only about 2% of that 10% goes to female founding teams. So many founders don't use VC at all to start their businesses, but let's look at those who do. One way to do that is to look at the unicorn success stories. Unicorns are companies that have grown to be valued at over $1 billion. Of the unicorn startups founded in 2021, 14% were founded by women, and that is an improvement from the year prior when it was 11%. It is really hard to start a company that can grow to be valued that highly. Almost always, in order to do that, to scale to that level, an entrepreneur needs to raise capital from venture capitalists, and not just once, but multiple times. So I wanted to share some newer research that's come out in the past year related to female founders who start multiple ventures and go after VC funding multiple times. According to this research study, this is from 2024, researchers found that women represent just 16% of first-time VC-backed entrepreneurs, and then the number decreases to 9% for those who have founded 2 VC-backed startups and only 4% for 3 or more VC-backed startups. So I want you to just think about this for a moment, because I know a lot of you know a lot about the funding landscape and are connected to this. So let's think about this. This means that a woman who has been in that tiny percentage of being able to raise VC funding for her startup is less likely to be able to do so a second time with a second venture. And why is that? The researchers found that the probabilities of venture success, of making it to a successful exit through an IPO or an acquisition, were no less favorable for women-founded ventures. So an investor was just as likely to have a great outcome with a serial founder who was a man as a serial founder who was a woman, yet the investor was less likely to back the woman. So let me be even more specific. Even in the situation where a woman started the venture, backed by VCs, and had a successful exit, returning money to investors, this woman was 18% less likely than her male counterpart to be able to raise money from VCs again for a second venture following her initial successful exit. So this is research that came out of the Yale School of Management, and they looked at a bunch of different factors. They compared men and women who co-founded the same type of startup, meaning a woman's failure to secure funding couldn't be blamed on the type of company that was being started, its quality, or its ultimate outcome. And then here is the real kicker, I think, of this particular study. The researchers studied what happens when a VC investor invests in a female-founded venture that fails. Now, keep in mind, we all know this, that failure is pretty common in entrepreneurship and in VC investing. Many ventures are expected to fail. However, if an investor invests in a woman whose venture fails, that investor is less likely to invest in any future women-led businesses, period. And conversely, I'll say if the investor has invested in a women-led business that succeeded, they are not more likely to invest in women-led businesses in the future. So that should strike you as many things: odd, surprising, disturbing, if not because of the bias, simply because it goes against what we typically know about venture investing, which is that usually investors like serial entrepreneurs, even when the entrepreneurs fail. There are so many studies that show that multiple attempts at business creation correlate to eventual success. So why are female founders not getting a second or third bite at the apple? The authors of this study suggest something else is going on, more related to biases and stereotyping, and I'll get into that in a moment. But I want to just take a moment to point out that what you can see from this study also are the missed opportunities. So if there are investors in the room, perhaps this is something that you can take advantage of. Failing to invest in experienced women founders is leaving money on the table and resulting in missed opportunities for our economy overall. So what is happening in these VC firms that contributes to this phenomenon? Well, we know that 3/4 of US VC firms don't have a single female founding investing partner, and those that do, the number is around 11%. These numbers are on the rise. There are more women-led funds forming. They're commanding more investment dollars than before, and the numbers are still small, but you can definitely see the trend. So let's return to our theme tonight: breaking barriers. How do we attempt to explain why women aren't receiving as many of the VC dollars? Usually when someone asks me about these statistics, why is it only 2 to 3%, and why has it remained that way for so long, they ask me two questions. One, are women starting businesses? And two, are they even asking for VC funding? So let's talk about that. Recently, the Impact of Women-Owned Businesses report, which came out from Wells Fargo, was published. This is about a year and a half ago, which reported that 39% of all businesses, that's over 14 million businesses, were women-owned. So yes, I think we can say women are starting businesses. They are. In fact, the number of women-owned businesses during the COVID years increased at double the rate of those owned by men. So the second question, are they asking for VC money? This is a little bit harder to get at. We can say with certainty that some female founders are asking, but it might be fewer women asking than men. And I'll give you some data on this in a moment. If this is sounding now very depressing, I'm sorry. There's going to be some uplifting parts, I promise. But know that in the classes that we teach at the University of Chicago and the ones I teach, we talk about why the numbers look like this, and in talking about this, how to position founders to be successful in the fundraising process. And so I want to share some of that advice with you. So I mentioned earlier, research confirms women are great entrepreneurs. I thought I would share just a few of these proof points. BCG did a report that showed that despite their funding disadvantage, women-owned businesses generate higher revenue than the male counterparts. They are more capital efficient and more careful about how they spend their resources. Number two, founding teams that have a woman on the team outperform all male teams by 63%. This was data published from First Round Capital. And finally, 17% have had successful exits. And back to that BCG research, the average return on investment for women-owned companies was double that of men-owned companies. So why not back them and start their ventures? There was a fascinating study done by a group of researchers from LBS, the London Business School, and Harvard in 2018 that I think really illustrates beautifully some of the biases that exist that we don't even think about. What they did was to analyze a question and answer period from a big pitch event called TechCrunch Disrupt in New York City. So this is a very large event where entrepreneurs are pitching their ventures for investment to investors. And the researchers decided to study the questions that the entrepreneurs were asked by these investors. And they looked at interactions between 140 prominent VCs. By the way, 40% of them were women, and 189 entrepreneurs, of which 12 were women. And by the way, that 12% really does show that women are asking for VC funding. There are some who are asking. So although all of these ventures were at a very similar stage, a very early stage in their trajectory, they found that the male-led startups raised 5 times the amount of funding that the female startups raised. And the really fascinating thing they found was that the types of questions that were asked to the male entrepreneurs were different than those asked to the female entrepreneurs. Not different as in like completely different questions, but different in that they were promotion-focused for the men and prevention-focused for the women. So I'll give you an example of this. A male founder would be asked, how do you plan to monetize this business? And a female founder would be asked, how long will it take for you to break even? The former is focused on envisioning the gains and how big this could get. The latter is focused on mitigating losses. So the questions to the men were aligned with these expectations that their ventures would continue to be successful and grow, and the women were expected to prove that they could execute a safe return of capital back to the investor. So the reality is that biases exist, but knowing that they exist can help you because you do not need to play by these rules. So if you are sitting here thinking, this seems very unfair, I will encourage you to think about how to flip the script and how to do that quite literally. If you are an entrepreneur sitting here focused on talking to investors and getting VC investment, I would encourage you to be mindful of these questions and think about how you can change them to be more promotion focused. So if you are asked a prevention question, how will you prevent competitors from taking away your customers? You can answer it with a promotion answer. Our target market is growing incredibly quickly and we have an amazing opportunity to serve them. So think about how to do that. And before I wrap up, I do want to share just some optimism so it's not too depressing. There are some really great trends here in Chicago. In the past 5 years, Chicago has seen a significant increase in the number of venture capital-backed startups. More than a third of new VC-backed Chicago startups have at least one woman co-founder. And this is significant. This is a higher female founder percentage than Atlanta, Austin, Boston, Denver, LA, Miami, New York, San Francisco, or Seattle, putting Chicago in the #1 spot for VC-backed startups founded by women. So that's good. And if you're wondering what is that, like why is this happening, you're about to see 2 amazing panels that can speak to this very topic. I will mention, by the way, that data about Chicago's performance in this regard is collected by Chicago Blend in partnership with World Business Chicago. And Chicago Blend publishes annual reports of the state of diversity in Chicago's VC and startup ecosystem. You can actually read their entire report online for free, so I would encourage you to do that. So I'm going to close, but in closing, I just want to give some advice, again, for those in the audience who are contemplating raising money, starting or growing a business. And I want to encourage you to do a few things based on what this research I've shared with you would say. The first, be bold. The most VC money goes into tech, healthcare, energy, and media. Think of what you can do in these spaces and set your sights high. You could be in a position to start and grow or lead the next unicorn startup. Being bold also includes being resilient. They won't all be yeses, but overcoming those obstacles and facing the challenges will make you a better founder. The second thing is learn how to sell. Selling correlates to 100% of company survival. Selling has a weird reputation, sometimes a little sleazy. It is not sleazy. It is about building relationships and then leading to a win-win exchange of value. And the third thing, don't be shy about asking for things. Women do not ask as much as men. I know this because I run a top-tier MBA program in the entire country, and I can tell you that study after study shows this, and we see it in the MBA community, even at schools like Chicago Booth. One of our peer schools did a study recently involving MBA graduates that showed that even in business school, where I think 99% of students take a class on negotiations, even there, female MBA graduates do not negotiate their starting salaries after graduating at the same rate as their male counterparts, and it's not even close. It's 12% of women negotiated their starting salaries compared to 52% of men. Women tend to think that they will get hired or promotions just by being excellent and expecting it to get noticed. They tend to keep their businesses at a place where they can fund it themselves rather than asking for investment from angels or VCs. So don't be shy about asking for things. And my last and final point, we have a mantra at Booth that I'm going to share with you called Pay It Forward. When you are ready and you're on the path to success, think about how you can pay it forward to the female founder who has an idea or a vision or has that dream of her own that she wants to make a reality. Maybe you can invest in her. Maybe you can become her mentor. Maybe you can simply share some wisdom with her that will help her succeed and avoid pitfalls and some of these barriers that we know exist. And just by being here tonight, you are doing that. You are paying it forward. So on that note, I am going to wrap up, and I will welcome up to the stage our first panel, the Chicago Blueprint panel. And this panel will be about progress and possibility, Chicago's role in supporting women entrepreneurs. So Betsy, Sonia, Shayna, and Ellie, I will welcome you up to the stage. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. How you feeling so far? All right. Thank you to the Executives Club for inviting all of us to be here. We're excited to be here. And Margaret, congratulations to you. I know this is your last event, but I think we should all give a round of applause to Margaret. She's done a phenomenal job over her 6+ year tenure, and I think we're all lucky to be in your circle. So thanks for including us. I've got the pleasure of being on stage with 3 phenomenal leaders who have way more knowledge and insight and expertise that they can share in the 25 minutes or so that we have. I'm going to be keenly watching a person waving wildly at me to tell me when it's ready to stop. We're going to bounce around a little bit, but I wonder if as we start, if you can just each share how you got started in this space, right? In this industry, in this space, in this role of being a capital allocator. And was there some moment, some person, some spark, some moment that sort of made that a possibility for you, or even a vision in your head? And Sonia, why don't we'll go straight down, and then the next group one, we'll start with you, Ellie, and come this way.
So I had an accidental or nonlinear path into venture capital. I had studied engineering. I worked as an engineer. I went to business school, so I was good at math and science. I did a summer in investment banking at Goldman Sachs in their tech group. And I worked on the IPO team for a company in the payment space called Bill Me Later. This was summer of 2007. At that time, Amazon was still largely a books and media company. And in the course of doing all the work, that company decided not to go public. They took a big strategic investment from Amazon. I got really excited about what Amazon was doing. And their pitch to business school students was, come, you can launch a whole category. So in 2008, I joined Amazon and launched the clothing category. And then I got engaged. My husband was out in New York, so I left Amazon. And that's when in 2010 to 11, I founded a mobile shopping startup, raised venture capital funding, rode the ups and downs of that. Ultimately, that startup was acquired by a company that was public at the time, Retail Me Not, that was out of Austin. So I started splitting time between New York and Austin post-acquisition. I ran their mobile team. And when my earnout was up, my husband and I were ready to start a family. We wanted to come back home to the Midwest. And I thought I was going to start another startup. So when we moved to Chicago, I was meeting with the venture capital folks. There was like 5 funds in 2015 era Chicago. And and just getting to know them ahead of having to ask them for money, because my big lesson learned as a first-time founder, female founder, I think any founder, is that it helps to be known before you ask people for money. And I was connected with the Pritzker Group, and they invited me for a coffee chat, and I thought it was to like get to know me as a startup founder, but they liked my background, and they asked me if I'd ever thought about being an investor. So that was 9 years ago that I switched over from being a founder. And then for many years, I thought I was going to jump back over.
Bounce back and forth.
And then I realized I really like being diversified and not being all in on a single thing. So.
And now, how
I'm
many
here.
children?
3 kids later.
kids later,
And
wow.
yes, and then last year I left Pritzker Group to launch my own fund.
Tell them the name.
The fund is called Snack Venture Partners. It's my initials and my partner's initials. And yeah,
Awesome.
we raised the fund
Thanks,
last year.
Sonia. All right, Shayna, how about you?
All right. Hello, is this working? Yes, okay, awesome. Also very much an accidental VC, so I think you'll find this theme on our panel. But I've spent my career in the food industry as an operator. Always at this intersection of impact and innovation. I was in big food, I was at Mars for many years, really helping the company think about risk management and changing world on the procurement side. And then I joined Farmer's Fridge as the first exec hire here in Chicago, COO, and led some pretty tremendous early growth at that company. But the thread that kept coming back was not finance, it was not VC, it was technology. And I kept asking, why is this industry so antiquated and so old school? For those of you who have worked in the food industry or work in antiquated industries, you see this over and over again, and you see a huge, huge opportunity. So it was 2020, and I thought I was going to start a company. I mean, in the end I did, but I didn't think it was going to be a venture firm. And started exploring this idea of doing maybe some venture investing lightly, some angel investing on the side while I was trying to figure out what company I wanted to build. And through that process, my now business partner and I started talking. She had transitioned into VC about a decade ago, started talking about opportunities in our space, and we ended up kind of developing this investment thesis by accident. So about 6 months into these conversations, we had a couple of commitments and decided to launch the firm Supply Change Capital. And what I realized is that there was a real hunger on the LP side for operators that really understood, knew the industry, pairing with experienced VCs. So that's how I launched my firm.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Shayna. Ellie?
The Accidental VC is going to be the name of the book we all co-write
Yeah, agreed.
at some point.
Yeah.
So my own non-traditional path is I'm a recovering bureaucrat by trade. I spent the first leg of my career working in the Emanuel administration in its earliest days. And I recall when we opened the doors to 1871 and all of the energy and excitement. And I felt a little sad going back to my cubicle afterwards. I was like, all right, well, I guess back to briefings about policy. Which was important and exciting, but I realized over time, the first few years of a new administration was like being a part of a startup. And as we really settled into a rhythm of established patterns, I was like, why am I less and less happy here? And I was like, oh, because I like building things. And the pace at which I like to move wasn't necessarily in parallel with how the pace of government works. And I'm a big believer in good government before anyone starts spreading rumors otherwise. But when I left the bureaucracy, I asked myself, where was I going to be a great fit? And an opportunity came up to co-found a civic tech startup to try and solve some of the big intractable problems with democracy and build tech-enabled solutions. And when I left that co-founding partnership, I was splitting my time between Chicago and LA, working with venture-backed startups in Los Angeles, testing the waters, seeing if I was actually an Angelino at my core, and it turns out not. I like the Great Lakes. And when I came back to Chicago full-time, I started a product market fit studio to help early stage companies put their end user at the center of their processes. And over the 6 years of running that firm, we would work closely with different venture capital firms, bringing them founders that we may or may not be working with and providing our perspective on where real value was being created with the end user. And more often than not, we'd get into these conversations, sometimes with people who hadn't operated before, and we would see something that they couldn't see. And I realized that if I wasn't a capital allocator, I was leaving tremendous upside on the table and leaving great founders behind. So no one asked me, but I asked myself how I could contribute through venture.
Yeah, love that. And I love you all have operator experience, founder experience. You've taken things from 0 to 1. You've worked in bigger companies or administrations, driving change, and now taking all that to, giving that back to the community and the companies that you support. Sonia, there's been a lot that's happened in Chicago to support women entrepreneurs. You mentioned 1871, so I'm going to take the opportunity to also say 1871. But 1871, M-Hub, Matter, P33, Polsky, Northwestern, DePaul, like tons and tons of stuff. Can you maybe help paint a picture of what the landscape is in Chicago right now, and as a blueprint for investments?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things in any startup ecosystem is capital. So maybe I'll focus there because I think there are a ton of educational resources now more than ever. There's online resources. There's 1871. Anytime somebody asks me where's the first place you go as a founder when you're just getting started, I always point them towards 1871 as a place to get education, community, and orientation. But ultimately, if you're a founder and you want to go build something, you need to hire people, you need to have money to put into marketing, and so you need capital. And there are different kind of stages of capital and communities here in Chicago. I think we have a really great angel ecosystem in Chicago that's a little bit unique. So Desiree's in the room. I know she's going to talk later about Josephine Collective. HPA has a great angel group that I know many of you may be members of. There are funds that have emerged. And one thing I'm sure we'll get to talk about later is, you can either support an ecosystem by investing directly in founders. However, unless you're going to do that professionally or build a portfolio of 20 to 21 companies, because the failure rate is so high, you need the diversification. It may make more sense to invest in a fund. There are funds for like every interest and sector and stage in the ecosystem that you can support. So Long Jump is a great example of a fund led by Rebecca Conweiler here that is supporting founders at the earliest stages. People will talk about angel investing in the friends and family round, which is great if you have really rich friends. Less great if you don't have that network or ecosystem. And so Long Jump is filling a really interesting gap there. There are accelerators which you can participate in. And then you get into the institutional funds that are at the seed stage, is kind of the first stage. And then there's A, B, C, like a nice alphabetical order that goes on from there. And then like a big lump of funds that you'll call growth equity funds. I'd say what Chicago does really well is we have this early stage ecosystem that's really well developed. There's a bunch of great female leaders. What we're still lacking is the later stage ecosystem to take, who we hand our companies off to once you need a 10, 15, 20, or $100 million check is kind of where the gap is.
I think that's a great segue into, there's lots of places that Chicago shines, but there is opportunities for us to be better. So Shayna and Ellie, what would you add to the list of things that Chicago needs to think about being better at, particularly in support of women founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things Chicago does really, really well, and it's been amazing to enter this space as a female VC in Chicago, is lift each other up and support the community. So I just want to put kind of a fine point on that. One of the things that we did about a year and a half ago, and World Business Chicago was a great supporter of this, was a couple of female-led funds got together and said, there's so many women in this community that want to be LPs, and it's a high ticket to write an initial check. You're talking $100,000, $200,000, $500,000. What if you want to write a $10,000 check or a $20,000 check? So one of the things we did is we figured out that if three funds came together and created an SPV or a pooled vehicle, we could accept checks from up to 99 investors, but it would only be one line on our cap table. So we did this thing called the 3GP VC fund. It really needed some branding. We really needed Ellie on that one. But what we did is we raised $1.8 million from 58 individuals in Chicago, so a $600K check for each of our funds. And as an individual investor, you then get a portfolio of 75 companies for as little as a $20K check. We had a $250K check that kind of anchored, but most of the checks were $20K. And so I know I'm not answering your question of what could Chicago do better, but I think Chicago did that really well.
Yeah.
It was an example for other ecosystems, and constantly I feel very uplifted by this community of women here.
Chicago did that well, but you were at the center. I mean, you and your two colleagues really made that happen. So yeah, you can say Chicago did it well, but it was because of your drive and initiative that did that. So yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Please.
No, you're good. So anyway, I'll wrap with that because I know you have a lot to say.
You're going to turn it over to me for the challenges.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about what we can do better.
Well, for the friends I have in the room, I have no shortage of hot takes on this. And I should preface this by saying that I feel like Chicago is kind of like that uncle we all have, where like externally to the world, my uncle is a perfect angel and has never done anything wrong. But here amongst family, can we just talk about what Uncle Bob said at Thanksgiving? So Chicago really is this phenomenal place to build and scale a company and a fund, right? Like, Star shared with us some really compelling data about how many female founders we have building and growing here, and that's something worth celebrating. But now the question becomes, how do we double down and triple down on that impact so that it becomes irrefutable that not only can you start here, but you can grow and scale here and exit here, and then stay here after your exit and keep putting that money back in. And I think that there are some critical things that we can do as this ecosystem continues to mature. And first and foremost is starting to carve out more clarity around the different types of entrepreneurship that exist. I think sometimes we talk about entrepreneurship in this big bucket of like every woman founder. And it's like there is a difference between a woman who is starting a singular brick and mortar in her community with no intention of scale, or scale to her means 2 more locations, and she's going to put her kids to work and hopefully hand over a legacy for her family in 20 to 30 years. Versus a woman who is asking, how do I IPO? How do I ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange? And how do I create life-changing money, not just for me, but for the thousands of employees I hire? And so we can't take those as the same journey. And in turn, we have to think about how we resource those 2 women differently. And then the third, obviously there's a little self-interest here, so let's give that disclosure. But women who start funds, we can't miss the fact that they are in fact capital entrepreneurs. The 2 women next to me and many of the women in our ecosystem who've taken the brave leap in starting funds, there aren't a whole lot of resources and infrastructural support for us in making that leap. There is no non-dilutive grants for us. There are no angel tax incentives for being those first checks to get us started, getting us to that first close so that we can have management fees under our belt and in our bank accounts to start generating returns for you sooner. So I think that as our ecosystem matures, these are ways that we can carve out new and exciting interventions and resources.
Mm-hmm. So would you like to add anything else to the mix of things we can do better?
Yeah, I think we have the makings of greatness. However, I do think we have some perception issues in Chicago as a whole. And so when I think about from a media perspective, I've had a number of conversations with All Raise, which is an organization that serves to promote both women founders and women investors that was started by some very successful women investors on the coast. And I think there's an opportunity to do more to promote the profile of the people who are doing great work rather than, Star said, a lot of times women will put our head down, we'll do the work, but we're not getting the same, we're not going to be the ones necessarily shouting off the rooftops what our returns are. And so I think there's an opportunity there. And then from a policy perspective, I do think that there's tax incentives that could be put in place to make this a more attractive city to build in and to build firms in as a founder and a funder.
One other quick thing
please.
to add, because I didn't answer a question the first time around, but you're both making me think. Something that we have talked a lot about is there is great industry in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of capital in the Midwest, and that capital tends to be a little risk adverse for the technology industry because that's not where the capital was made. It's not generational wealth coming, or one generation before coming from tech. And so I think there is a big question about how do we unlock this capital so that the families that have built these businesses aren't viewing this as philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are some capital entrepreneurs in the room that have figured out how to tap philanthropy dollars for early stage venture, which is awesome. But this is a barrier that a lot of us are banging our head up against. And so really open to ideas of how do we help this intergenerational family wealth start to see emerging funds and early stage VCs as money-making opportunities.
Terrific. So I think the sort of list across the 3 of you, how do we turn that list into action? What do we literally need to do? Ellie, let's start with you. What if you got to have a magic wand and you got to say we're going to do one thing to make these challenges either lessen or disappear, what would you do?
One thing?
Well, you can list more.
Okay, right. As founders, discipline, focus, do one thing, do it well. Okay. Yeah. I am really enamored with Partnership Fund for New York. I think the model is remarkable, and I'm deeply curious how Chicago can build an evergreen fund that sustains innovation here for generations. I'd love to see something like that emerge here.
Has that been going along Has that been in place a long time in New York, or is it relatively new?
Since the mid 1990s, they raised one fund. I believe it was 117 million.
Yeah.
And there's a workforce arm paired with it, but it exists outside of City Hall. So regardless of what happens with the administration, the priorities of Partnership Fund are pretty locked, and it's rooted in where they have a right to win. And a great example of this is their investments in fintech, right? Finance New York, no brainer. And they attract the best and brightest companies to New York from around the globe to participate in an accelerator partnership they have with Accenture. They make investments, and when those returns come in, it goes to
back
fund the
in.
next
Yeah.
crop
Amazing.
of great startups.
Okay, great. Somebody writing this down? Yeah, okay. All right, Shayna?
Love that. Okay, so if you're not coming from generational family wealth, it is really hard to get started in our space, like you were saying, close the capital, get it in the bank, but also funds 1, 2, and 3, that it's 10 years of entrepreneurship, just like a founder's grinding, right? 10 years of that. And so I think that some kind of a combination of a citywide grant program / working capital for emerging VCs, fund 1, 2, 3 would be amazing. So putting that into the universe.
Sonia?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a capitalist. So, I mean, I think about, in order for there to be more female founders, I think you need more female fund decision makers or female capital allocators. In order to have more female capital allocators, you need to have more women or LPs, men and women, that are investing in women-led funds. And also, it needs to be bigger dollars. Like right now, all of the female-led funds, many of the female-led funds are all sub 100 million in Chicago. And like, until we have, like, Success is $1 billion female-led fund in Chicago. And that's generally something you earn your way into. Like with each fund, if you're successful, you get to double your AUM. That's going to take time, and that takes somebody making a bet on you and giving you the capital so that you can prove out your track record. And I think that's got to have to come from institutions.
Yeah.
I was at a conference once where they said things change when billionaires care. And I think I'm a little biased. I think JB's done a lot of great things for the city. I obviously worked for him for some period of time.
Yeah.
But I think we need more kind of billionaires to care about what the legacy of Chicago is. And the opportunity for women to be like a headline story for the legacy of Chicago.
Just out of curiosity, how many women-led funds are at $1 billion or more AUM? Obviously not in Chicago, but in the country.
As a first-time fund, Mary Meeker.
Oh, sure.
One.
Yeah, Mary Meeker. Yeah,
There's really not a lot.
first time.
Yes.
But
And
others have
meanwhile-
grown into it?
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
I could name 20 first-time funds. I could name some funds that have been founded by 30-year-olds that are not female-founded that raised first-time billion-dollar funds.
Gotcha. Okay. We have time for one last question, and this was shared by Star in her talking points, and it's been implied in what you have said as well. But one of the best things I think about Chicago is that we generally believe a win for one is a win for everybody. So how can we all better support each other? Yes, we can provide capital, we can offer guidance, networking, strategic. Like, what is the call to action for everybody in this room to best support our founder community and you as capital allocators and the group at large? Who would like to start? This is your final.
go.
This is your final
I
time
can-
on the mic.
I can go.
Okay, please.
Look, women are over-mentored, both for emerging managers and for founders. Please don't make another intro to a strategic advisor. Please don't make another intro to someone who could be a consultant. Write me a check and make an intro to a check writer with the explicit mandate that we're here to talk about how I'm going to make you a lot of money.
I see several female founders right here saying, yes, that's right. All right, Shayna?
I should have gone last.
I was just the opening act for you, Shayna.
I love it. Gosh. Okay. Outside of writing a check, because obviously that's the number one thing, the network amongst women is amazing, and I see a lot of friendly faces in this room of women who are working across industries and doing phenomenal work. And what I've really loved about the community here, and I think we should just keep doing more of it, is this like transaction type interaction that is very generous, where we really enjoy being together, we really enjoy mentoring each other. It's a give forward, but you are also transacting and not being afraid to transact. So I just think we need to keep doing more of that.
Terrific. Sonia?
Yeah, I
Bring us
mean,
home,
I feel
Sonia.
like those were kind of the two things that I would emphasize as well.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I'll go back to the media spotlight of like, I think there are, if you aren't able to put capital towards the cause, you can still put your voice towards the cause of promoting female stories, of female founders, and if you have the opportunity to talk to the broader press, make sure that you're including women in those stories as your examples of successful founders, successful investors, et cetera. Because all those data points create a broader narrative that trickles down into investment dollars. And perception becomes reality.
All right, please join me in thanking these three phenomenal leaders. Thank you.
As we're gathering, I want to pile on to a little bit of love. The last time I was on a stage moderating for the Executives Club, it was the Monday before the Wednesday when the world shut down. And if any organization should be instantly dead, it was the Executives Club, but here they are. They were the first to help us figure out how work works. They pivoted, they refocused, they even rebranded, and they are revitalized. What a heck of a run over the last 5 years. I have the pleasure, I'm actually going to go into a little bit of the background of some of these fine panelists, and hello to the incredible faces in this room, just to give you a sense of the clout and cred that these people have, because I think oftentimes women don't hype women when it's themselves, and so I'm going to do it for them. Susan Abrams, to my right, Managing Director of Golden Seeds, that's in the bio, but what is it? An investment firm that pursues market returns through the empowerment of women entrepreneurs and the people who invest in them. Previously, she was the CEO of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and she increased foot traffic by 700% in less than 10 years. And a through line in her career has been advancing women in business, including as the author of The New Success Rules for Women, published by Random House. This is Susan. Far end, we have the one and only Desiree. I think she's one of the people in Chicago that just goes by, you can first name, everybody knows who she is, Desiree Vargas Wrigley. She is a serial founder, CEO of Give Forward and Parachute, turned community builder, turned venture capitalist, and her life's work is to level the playing field in tech or with tech. She's the founding general partner at Velocity, a fund that is focused on accelerating capital flow within Chicago's venture ecosystem. While she was at P33 as the chief innovation officer, she launched TechRise, a program that supports underrepresented founders, and she contributed $160 million in funding to these founders. In addition to her day job, Josephine Collective was already mentioned. It's an angel investment group that empowers women and people of color in investing. And last but not least is Melissa, a litigator turned founder litigator, turned bank founder, chief legal officer, and a spearheader of the Women's First Bank, where she's also head of impact deposits. And I will say, she's probably tough as nails. She's also very kind-hearted. I've had dinner with her, and she's a very nice person for all the bossing and starting and litigating. I'm sure she says objection every third word, but you can't tell at dinner. She's also quite the community and civic leader, serving on the boards of Personal PAC and Project 50, volunteering with the ACLU, and serving in leadership roles with the Jewish Women's Foundation and the Jewish Federation of Chicago. She makes an impact in and beyond the boardroom, and she empowers women and strengthens communities. So, yeah. The title of this panel is Changing the Investor Landscape, Angel Investing, and the Untapped Potential of Women Investors. And the group got to talking about why there is untapped potential in women investors. And the question was, do women invest differently or just less than men? And it became clear that this group has a focus that is throughout their real jobs and their hobby jobs. They're not here to close the wage gap. They're here to close the wealth gap. And that comes when wealth is created through ownership, including one of the relatively illiquid and high-risk asset classes that involves buying shares in teeny tiny companies, which is angel investing. And so I wanted to start off with each of you. Would you please share how you think through the problem of the wealth gap and how you're trying to help close it with your work?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay, great. There it goes. I'm going to focus on the work I'm doing through Golden Seeds, which, as you heard, invests exclusively in women-founded and led businesses. So Golden Seeds goes after the wealth gap in two different ways. The first is with the investor side, looking at potential investors who may not be really thinking about their investments at all or outsourcing to somebody else. And the second is the entrepreneurs and helping them to build their wealth, because as we know, we've so many stories, and thankfully we love the most recent story in Chicago about building wealth with female founders, and also great for the investors. So thinking from the investment side, it's my experience that one of the obstacles is familiarity, that we have to demystify the process for investing broadly and particularly in early stage companies. And so one of the ways you can do this is through investing with a collective, like you heard, Josephine Collective, and also Golden Seeds, which Golden Seeds brings together 300 investors from across the country with expertise in all different areas. And so you can learn with and through investing with these other folks and in fabulous women-founded industries. The other piece of it, I think, is being really intentional about sharing resources for learning, not just through osmosis of working on things. And so Golden Seeds in that regard has a best-in-class knowledge institute, which includes a range of classes that you can take real-time or as a webinar, starting with intro to angel investing. So really foundational, but progressing through the different pieces that you need to know as an investor. So due diligence, cap tables and term sheets, boardrooms and governance, all of the different things, and some sessions too on some of the verticals that Golden Seeds particularly focuses on that may be of interest to many in the room, from consumer products to the health sector to different pieces of technology sectors. So that's what I have to say.
So when we think about narrowing the wealth gap, I think, the question of why does that matter? And it's really about power, right? Women control so much of household spending, but if we previously haven't controlled that much wealth, that means we don't have a say in what kind of businesses are being formed, what kind of services and products are going into the world, and how are we protecting our earth and our future generations. And women are about to take over $30 trillion of wealth, making us the most powerful we've ever been in the history of humankind. But if that money sits where it has been in, public markets and often in the hands of male wealth managers, we're not actually going to see any of that power come to life. And so I'm incredibly passionate about helping people think about different ways that they can deploy their wealth. And it is wealth that might be inherited, might be created through creating different products that better align with the values that we often have as women investors. So there are a lot of different opportunities, like the funds that we were talking about already. But I also think that there are ways to think about values-aligned investing that's not about impact investing. It's really about thinking locally with your dollars. What happens when you put your money to work in your local economy for profit? No concessionary, return, like you're making returns. It is absolutely about that. That's one piece of it. And then the other is that we have a pattern recognition that we talk about as VCs a lot and as angel investors, and that is often it's a white male founder from a name brand school building in tech. We don't often have pattern recognition around what wealth looks like in women because we don't talk about it very much. And so we need to have a pattern of women creating wealth that we talk about. And I know that there are some women angels in this group that have made a lot of money from incredible investments. Talk for Amanda. But without having that out in front and center, then I think I see it in ourselves and in our strategies. And so I will say that is the other piece of the power and wealth gap, and that is creating new patterns of wealth creators and talking about it.
To follow up on what Desiree said, when we were raising capital for First Women's Bank, we came across a statistic from Time magazine, actually, that 60% of women would rather talk about death than money. And I think that is, women's attitudes about money are very complicated. Their attitudes about economic power are complicated and can have really far-reaching consequences. At the bank, we sort of are looking at one piece of this overall problem, and that's the gender lending gap. We decided to form First Women's Bank after really digging into the data about the women's economy and understanding that the women's economy in this country is large and powerful and growing. Star gave us some of the data that women own almost 40% of all the small businesses in this country. That's over 14 million small businesses. But together, those businesses are only accessing an estimated 5% of all dollars lent by banks. So there's this huge mismatch. And that gap, that inability to access the capital that these businesses need to grow and to thrive, is really preventing the women's economy and women-owned businesses from reaching their full potential. So that is the slice of the problem that we are focused on. And we know that by making capital more accessible to the women's economy, by unlocking those opportunities, the ripple effects are enormous. We know that not only does the national and the global GDP grow, but we know that families' lives improve and communities improve, all by powering the success of women.
I've read that women control the philanthropy dollars of the household, but not the investment dollars of the household. And I wish I had stats to back it up. But I'm curious how you, Melissa, think about the intersection of creating and generating a financial return and social impact.
So we really built our business model around that idea, the idea that we can do both at the same time. So our mission helps us attract deposit clients. So whether it's individuals, small business owners, nonprofits, foundations, or large global corporations who want to be strategic about what they're doing with their cash and understand that they actually can create positive social impact by being very intentional about where they bank, and that by banking at a bank that is going to put their cash, their dollars to work to create positive social outcomes, that they can really align their values with their banking relationship. But we also know that these same clients care about getting a fair return, and so we are able to do both. We pay fair interest rates to our clients. We are not necessarily the bank for the rate shoppers. We know that rate shoppers come for rate and they go for rate. But our clients tend to be sticky because they are coming to us for great customer service, fair returns, and knowing that their cash is being put to work to promote gender equality, to promote economic empowerment for women, and to close the gender lending gap. So we really can do both. We're also doing both through our partnership strategy, which is partnering with lots of large global corporations in Chicago and across the country. William Blair is one of our partners, United Airlines, Microsoft, Salesforce, Airbnb, Comcast, Aon. We have 15 or 20 who are holding deposits with us, essentially parking cash with us, so we can then use that cash to make loans to the small business economy across the country with a real strategic focus on women-owned businesses. And that really helps us. That enables us to fill the need to make loans to the women's economy and close the gender lending gap.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to actually go to Desiree next and kind of ask you to speak a little bit to the key factors angel investors look for when deciding to invest in a business. And does it have to be impact, or can the impact just be a great ROI?
Yeah, I think that impact is not the first lens through which investors or angel investors are looking, right? The first question is, will I make money? This is an asset class, and angel is the riskiest part of the asset class. I will say that you're coming in very early before much is proven. But what we ask ourselves at the Josephine Collective is this a big market opportunity? Do we believe in these founders to take on this opportunity? Will I make money? And then I think this is where women maybe differentiate themselves. And the question is, do I want this to exist in the world? And I don't use that same lens for our venture investing. Our venture investing is, does the power law work? Can we get a fund returner from this investment? But when you're an angel, you get to ask yourself that question because it is your money and you're the one who's placing the bet. And when women ask that question of themselves, usually, do we want this thing to exist in the world, can answer questions focused on our families and the environment. So there might be an impact component to the outcomes of this successful business hitting scale, but it's not the why of why we're investing. And so I think that we have a massive opportunity with all of the wealth that is about to change hands to think differently about angel investing. But I will also say that angel investing, like I said, it's high risk, but it also requires so much work because you really have to diversify, and you need to write about 20 checks across 5 years to have a real portfolio. And so a way to understand the asset class better is to do a little bit of angel investing through the Josephine Collective or Golden Seeds, where you're writing $1, $5, $10,000 checks per deal. It's much more accessible. And then understanding what you like in founders, what you believe in, what industries you support. And then honestly going to a fund manager and putting your money to work more meaningfully in the trusted hands of an expert. And so we had some incredible women here. Hopefully you'll consider my fund on that one too. But we have a growing pool of women, and I think our women fund managers are about to represent over $1 billion in AUM collectively in Chicago. I think that we are one of the fastest growing markets for women fund managers. And so as you think about the asset class and your diversification there, really do think about this pool of expert capital right here.
Thanks, Des. Susan, can you give us an overview of the current landscape of angel investors and what we're seeing as trends, hurdles, success stories, etc.?
Sure, a small question. There are about 400,000 angel investors in the U.S. About 15% of them invest through collectives, which you've heard some of what we consider the advantages of the collective approach. The level of investment in the last few years has been about $25 billion through angel investing. And how does that compare to the VC, venture capital market? That is a bit over $200 billion. And that is important. You heard that only a small percentage actually get venture capital dollars, but at the same time, as companies are growing and scaling and moving from friends and family to angel, and then many hope to get additional funding to accelerate their scaling and grow through the venture capital market. So a healthy venture market is actually also very helpful for the angel community too. What's been happening in trends? If we look back about 20 years to 2004, you see very few women playing in the angel space. In fact, I believe it was about 5% of angel investors were female, and women-founded companies were being funded at about 3% of the overall funding marketplace. Fast forward 20 years, and that has grown pretty steadily. The numbers are certainly better than those that Star shared about the venture market. They've grown so that each of those numbers since 2022 has been in the 30+% range. So that's a really encouraging piece of news there. And I can give you one example because Golden Seeds, interestingly, was founded in 2004, so 20 years ago. And in that time, Golden Seeds has funded about 250 companies to the tune of about $185 million. And those 250 companies have gone on to raise an additional $2 billion. And so that really, that example shows you the power of investing in women to stimulate not just, the women entrepreneurial market, but the overall innovation and economic, marketplace. So it's a really good thing for everyone. And I think I just highlight that some of what Star said about the many obstacles that actually create a tremendous opportunity for investors, angel and venture, to invest in women. So the investors in the Golden Seeds family are about 80% female. So, there are those others out there, and thank you to the men in the room as well, who are seeing this opportunity that exists for, women doing more with less and really creating very positive returns. So that's a little about the angel investing landscape.
Thank you, Susan. One final question before we go to the obligatory speed round. How do women's risk perceptions and investment strategies differ from men's in your perspective? And how do these differences influence their behaviors when it comes to investing? What's fact versus fiction?
Well, I was going to give more of an anecdote, so I don't know if it solves that. But I do think that often women get invited to invest in, especially angel deals, that are just not good deals. It's like your nephew's best friend's brew pub, and you put $25K in, and you don't ever see it again, and you're like, I tried angel investing, it's terrible. That is like a way to lose all your money. And I think that, understanding what a good pipeline looks like and having access to deals is a critical piece of being successful in this. And venture is such a high performing asset class. It outperforms everything else, but it is a long play. It is 7 to 10 years, and it is illiquid. And so I think that scares a lot of women investors. And so we don't participate early enough in our careers. And so we don't get the benefit of multiple turns of those 7 and 10 year cycles. And so if you get, if you get a 30x back on one of your investments, but then you're in your late 60s, you might not have, you might not want to do it again because you don't want to be investing your kids' money. And so I do think that it's really critical that we participate early and often, and that we rely on great networks to bring us pipeline of deals, including our male allies and our friends. And of course, collectives can help us do that. But really, you've got to play the game and get to work and write the checks.
It is, and in Chicago, it's such a great ecosystem with the universities, the accelerators, 1871, and so many others that were highlighted in the last panel. So I do think the opportunity exists not just in women, but to take advantage of what's happening in the middle of the country here.
Yeah, we see women's perceptions of risk playing into the commercial financing area in a number of ways, including the type of financing that they're seeking out. And often we see women sort of seeking out potentially the financing that is not the best fit. So on the one hand, we know that women tend to lean into personal financing tools when they launch their businesses and sometimes throughout the life of the business. And that can actually have quite a limiting impact on their ability to access commercial financing down the road. And on the other side of the spectrum, we see very successful firms that need growth capital, and they will sell equity to get that. And for many industries and for many businesses, that's absolutely the right call. But we also know that there is a point in the evolution of every business where it's important to evaluate your options, and a well-priced commercial loan can actually be much less expensive than selling equity. And in addition to the gender lending gap that we talk a lot about, there's also a gender equity gap where women own 47 cents of every dollar of equity in their companies that men own in theirs. So women are creating these great successful companies and then only owning half of that success.
Starting with Desiree, speed round. What's the one piece of advice that you'd like to offer each woman here? No offense to the men. Thank you for showing up.
Play the game. If we don't win, then we can't teach our daughters to win or our sons to win either. And it sets our entire family on this trajectory of kind of mediocre growth. And it undermines, I think, the impact that our dollars can have, our wealth can have, and that we can individually have. But most importantly, I think just get in the game.
I would say get comfortable with risk. Whether you're thinking about your next job or your next promotion, starting a business or applying for a loan for your business or making an investment in a woman-owned company or a woman-led fund, you should get comfortable with risk. Be smart and be cautious, but lean into risk.
I was going to say as well, dip your toe in, which was a version of what Desiree said, but absolutely risk to find a way to give it a go and start in a way that's most comfortable to you, with a friend, with a group. Get a little bit smarter and see where it takes you. My personal experience is that you'll know so much more than you think you do once you start down the path, and you'll contribute so much more than you think you will as well. And it's really great fun too to look across industries and companies and amazing founders and investors.
All right, let's go back to Desiree. If anyone wants to learn more about you or Josephine or any of the organizations you have mentioned, where should they go?
Well, if you want to join us in the Josephine Collective, you can go to joinjosephine.com, and there's a form to fill out, investor interest form, and we'll send you all the materials. And then for Velocity, it's velocityinitiative.com right now is the website, but I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive, and Desiree at vcf.vc for any questions.
So everybody should have a card at their seat, a Financial Feminist button, which we'd love for you all to join us and wear. The card has a QR code, which will take you right to our online account opening, and we would love for you all to support the bank with deposits. You also can go to firstwomens.bank, get a lot of information about the bank, and also open an account there.
goldenseeds.com, or reach out to me via LinkedIn and we can take the conversation from there.
All right, last question of the night. If you had to write the definitive book on the untapped potential of women investors, what would said title be? We'll start with Susan.
Okay. Mine would be A Seat at the Table, and that's because we need women to be at all kinds of tables, the conference room table, the boardroom table, the cap table as well, that list of corporate company investors.
Okay, mine would be How Women Supporting Women Can Change the World.
Mine would be Velocity Catalyst, subtitle. How a women-led venture fund is transforming a venture economy. And I know that's self-serving, but I really think that the work that we're all doing together is going to put Chicago on the map, and we are going to be the #1 city in the world for creating industries that are outside of the normal B2B SaaS through the incredible industry-led venture funds that are emerging here.
So, thank you. And I'll wrap up with just a little anecdote of my own, if I may. I've now written over 50 angel checks, but I will never forget my first. It was the smallest check I've ever written. It was for $5,000, and a mentor of mine had to pry it from my cold, dead hands. I did not want to part with that money, and I was told, you have to step up. You have to step up. And it happens to be, I've learned two things since then. One is the makings of a great founder, which is what that first check went to. It went to a woman whose kid was on a feeding tube for life, and she realized real food helped this kid be vital, and Ensure, high fructose corn syrup made that kid sickly. And so she's like, you need to be able to be on the go and have real food. And so she put it in a pouch. And it turns out people on feeding tubes are growing with the graying of the American population. And because it was her kid, you knew she was going to run through a wall. So I learned about what a good entrepreneur looks like, but I also learned that there are less expensive ways to be a feminist. You can step up in other ways. This is an asset class where you will have more zeros than wins. And you have to play the long game, and you can't think you pick winners because nobody does. You really do need lots and lots of deal flow. But it turns out that first check returned in 6.5 years, 14 times my money. Because she was a founder of the century, and she did do it all. And I spent a lot of time wishing I had written more than 10 times more. So if you ever want to get started, if you want to learn how you can lose a lot and still win big, I'd be happy to try to help you find ways to get started. As a wrap up, I would love to invite Kristen Prince.
I'm up here.
Oh, she's there already. All right, I was like.
I'm hovering. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Prinz. I'm founder and managing partner of the Prinz Law Firm, and I'm such a super fan of everybody on both of these panels. I hope that you all are as inspired as I am by what we heard today. I wrote so many notes down. One thing that really stood out that Star said was be bold. I know from founding my own firm and advising so many women and business owners that fortune favors the bold, and taking risks, calculated risks, do pay off. So we do need to step up. As Ellie said, how do we get women founders to IPO? We do that by including men and women. We hype each other. We write the checks. I believe what Sonia said, that capitalism can support all of us. We all can raise the $1 billion fund, or we could help the women in our lives do that. And part of it is, if you can't write the check, hype the women, hype the people who are the founders of businesses, hype the friend of yours, send referrals to that person, buy from them, support each other. Because I think a lot of times in our day-to-day, and I love the men, but we know so many men who are founders, we inadvertently just keep referring to them, and it has to be intentional. We really have to think about who we're sending our money to and how we can send more to women. And part of that is writing checks. And I'm a member of Josephine, HPA, Angeles. So I'm a member of a lot of different investment groups. And I would say, if you haven't been an investor before, join Josephine. It's such an easy entry point. You don't have to write a $10,000 check. If you don't have $10,000, you can write a $1,000 check. You can write $1,500 check. And that gets pooled with other women or other investors' money, and you can be helping a founder grow their business. It impacts Chicago. It helps us all be more successful and make more money. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with making more money. And I think women, sometimes we forget. We think we have to be all about the mission, but it is okay to make money. The last thing I want to say is I'm so grateful to Margaret, and I want everybody to stand up and give her a big ovation. Margaret has been so impactful for the Exec Club, for Chicago. She's a community builder, she's a friend, and I'm just so grateful to know her and to be part of her world. So thank you so much. I hope everybody sticks around in the ballroom, have drinks, network, find somebody to write a check for. All right. Thank you all.